Hello and welcome to the IVIDS Photoshop tutorial. I'm JR. I will be your hostess with the mostest throughout this video series. I did design this series for beginning interior design students, but if you would like to learn Photoshop, then by all means, please follow along. I do feel it is important for me to mention a few things before we get started. First, this series is truly for beginners who have never seen Photoshop before, so this is not going to teach you any advanced techniques or skills in Photoshop. Secondly, there are so many ways to use Photoshop, and this video is going to show you how I use the software. There could be other ways to do techniques that I show you, so some people may say that I am right or wrong in what I show you, but I don't really feel there is a right or wrong. I feel that the important thing to remember as a beginner is to just stay open, learn from me and others around you, and find the techniques that work best for you. Lastly, design software is not the easiest to learn. If you feel frustrated, awkward, or overwhelmed, it is very natural to feel this way. It just behaves different than most software that you've used before. Practice will make you perfect, but have patience with yourself as you move forward in your journey. And speaking of journeys, let's get started with yours. This video is going to introduce you to Photoshop, sort of a grand tour of the interface. Future videos are going to show you how to actually do things in Photoshop. But it's important for you to know where to go in order to do those things, right? So after you open Photoshop, you should see the home screen, which should look somewhat similar to mine. Now, as you can see, I've been working on a lot of different pictures here, but you can definitely, like it says, pick up where you left off or start fresh. So I could either choose one of these pictures that I was working on, or I can click open, which actually goes into the computer system, and you can find where you saved a specific file that you want to work on. Or you can create new. And so we haven't started anything. I think it's really important to see how to create a new project in Photoshop. So let's hit create new. What we have is the new document window that opens, and we have to tell Photoshop what size project, what type of project. We kind of have to get some of the initial stuff set up first so that Photoshop can create what we need. And I always start over on the right hand side first. You can title your project if you want to. I usually wait until I save the project to actually title it. The second thing you want to look at is what size of project do I want to work on? I'm going to keep it at 8.5 by 11 inches, but yours might have defaulted to what's called pixels. Pixels are the default unit that Photoshop uses to work with pictures and other types of projects that you'll do. I'm an interior design girl. I know inches, and so that's generally what I go with. But you might find that other professionals actually do use the pixels. So go with what you feel best. I'm sticking with inches, and I'm going to stick with the 8.5 by 11 size. Now you'll notice over here on the left hand side that there are other custom sizes that you can choose from, kind of depending on what projects you have been working with in the past, but they do have a lot of different options available to you there as well. The next thing to look at is your orientation. Do you want it to be portrait or landscape? I generally don't choose the artboards, like you can check it or uncheck it. I haven't really ever had to check it, so I just usually leave that, and if I need to add artboards, I can. Resolution is very important. This has to do with fine detail. So the higher the number, the finer of detail, or the more pixels per inch. So I'm going to show you a picture here of two circles, and you can definitely tell that when you divide the circle into more squares, and those squares are represented as pixels, you get more definition of the circle. Whereas if you have less pixels to depict the circle, it gets very blurry, it gets a little digitized, and we want to try and avoid that as much as possible. So I'm going to stick with the 300 resolution, and I'm going to stick with the pixels per inch, and I'll just open it. You can do pixels per centimeter too if you're on the metric system. The next thing to look at is your color mode, and this is super important. There's a lot of different color choices, but the two color choices that I want to really point out is the RGB color, which stands for red, green, blue. And those are the three colors of light that your monitors use to depict color on your monitor. So if you're doing any kind of project that's going to be web-based or projected or on the computer somehow, that's the color scheme that you need to go with. If you're going to print like posters or paper or actual printing of pictures, you'll want to go with CMYK color, and that stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Those are the four colors that every printer has when they print colors to paper. It just helps format your projects a little bit better. It tries to keep it more accurate for your end result purposes. So I'm just going to stick with RGB color for right now. And of course your background, you can tell it what color you want your background to be, if you want it white, black, or some other color. I'm just going to stick with white for right now. And there is an advanced option. I never really work with that too much, so I'm just going to kind of keep it hidden by just clicking on that little arrow next to advanced option. Now we're ready to create our new project, so go ahead and hit create. And this is the main screen that you're going to see when you start working with Photoshop. So the first thing I want to point out is the workspace. You're going to see a white canvas. That's basically what I called it. Think of it like a painting canvas. Anything you put on the canvas will ultimately be printable. The grayish background that you see, you can kind of use as a little sketchbook of sorts, but if you have an object placed there, it shouldn't print. So when you're working with Photoshop, you definitely want to place everything in the white area and just use the black area or grayed out area for anything that you might kind of be playing around with. The next thing I want to show you is the menu bar, which is up at the tippy top. It looks very familiar to things like Microsoft Word or Excel. This is where you go to find basically anything that you need to do. So for instance, under File, that's where you go to save projects. We're going to go to print projects, or basically do anything generally with projects. Edit is where we're going to go to use different colors and to kind of play with things a little bit. All of these up here at the top have different ideas. Filters, I mean, everybody's so familiar because of smartphones these days of how you can render or sharpen or give artistic qualities to photos through filters. There's also 3D aspects that I won't be getting to in this series, but there's definitely some things to play with here. Plus all the different types of panels that we use in Photoshop to help us achieve the looks that we're going for. So that's the menu bar. Right underneath that is the options bar. And right now it looks like this, but as you start selecting things up in the menu bar, this option bar changes according to the command that you tell Photoshop to do. So there could be options, for instance, if we did text, and you'll see where this will change and it will have font, and it will have size, and it will have justification. Everything will change depending on what you are choosing to do in Photoshop. So that's a really important bar to know, the options bar. Next is the toolbar, which you see located over here on the left-hand side. The toolbar has a lot of things that we'll be using in this series, from selection tools to cloning to coloring to text to zooming and panning around. There's a lot of different things on this toolbar. You're going to get very familiar with it very quickly. Over on the right-hand side, you're going to see a whole lot of stuff going on. And I've heard this area called so many different things, from palettes to navigators to panes. I personally call them panels. You can switch in between them, and it just helps us modify what we're doing. Like for instance, we can add color. There's different swatches that we can look at to choose that we're working with. Layers is the big organizational aspect of Photoshop that's super important. It also helps us adjust what shapes are on top of each other and what shapes are below each other. And of course, down here at the bottom, there are some additional commands that we can do. So I don't know that there's a real name for this, but I just call it the additional options bar. So we can delete things, we can add adjustment layers, and do all kinds of things that you're going to learn in this series. So I want to end this video by kind of going over the purpose of Photoshop. Photoshop is really a photo editing software. It's where you go to actually manipulate images like JPEGs or PNGs or TIFFs. It's raster based, which means it's pixel based. And you can create graphics, you can do a lot of animation like GIFs and things like that with Photoshop. For interior design, I use Photoshop a lot. I use it to adjust photos, color, to crop, to tone, to change elements in a picture. For instance, I can take lines out of a wall if I feel the need to. I can place or take away objects in the picture, like people. I also do like presentational related materials. Sometimes I do logos and such, but I generally like to do logos in Adobe Illustrator just because it's a vector image versus a raster image. In theory, the vector image is something that can be scalable. It can be made really big or really small, and it doesn't get pixelated. Whereas if I try to do logos and make them big or small, they do get pixelated pretty quickly. So this is the interface of Photoshop. In future videos, you're going to learn how to actually do some pretty amazing things.